Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me and welcome to Favorite Unpopular Albums. So, I think a lot of us have our favorite bands and we always like that one particular album that maybe nobody else likes and we can't necessarily put our finger on why that is. But sometimes an album just clicks with you. It's a perfect album and yet it's very unpopular with everyone else. And so I've got 12 of those I'm going to run through with you guys. I hope you find this interesting. Some of these I think you might expect. Some of these I've gone a different direction on, and I'll get into all that here in just a bit. But before we start, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like. All those things do help support my channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, if you turn on notifications, hey, you'll stay up to date on really cool episodes just like this, where I'm talking about my favorite unpopular albums. Now, I'm wearing an AC/DC shirt. I'm going to talk about an AC/DC album. And those of you that know me would think I'm going to talk about Fly on the Wall. And it happens to be my favorite, most unpopular album by the band. But because I talk about this one so much, I'm not going to talk about it. I have another one that is very unpopular for some reason, and yet when it came out in 2014, I thought the thing was absolute perfection, and I still feel that way. So, AC/DC Rock or Bust, 16th studio album, first album following the passing of founding member guitarist Malcolm Young. Now, it's also the first album where his nephew comes in, Stevie, and I think that was the jarring aspect. A lot of people just dismissed the album, even though it is co-written, Angus, Malcolm together, all the songs written that way, I don't know. People just dismissed it. Now, it's only a 35-minute album. It's actually the band's shortest album. Fly on the Wall, no, not Fly on the Wall. I think Flick of the Switch was 37 minutes. And so this now takes the cake. And I will say that is the only downfall to this album. It's produced by Brendan O'Brien, who's worked with Pearl Jam and a ton of other famous artists. So in my opinion, all the goods are there. You got Malcolm, you've got Angus Young, co-writing all the songs. You got the songs, you got the producer, you still got Brian Johnson on vocals. I really don't understand why there is such a disdain for this album. It just got slammed by everybody at the time, maybe 10 years on, because it's 10th year anniversary for this thing. Maybe people feel a little bit different about it, but I still love it. I just think all the songs on it are really good. There's not any particular one on here, but Rock the Blues Away, I think that was maybe the second single that was off of here. Really, really good song on here. The song Play Ball, which had a music video, and I want to say it had to do with baseball, and then it became like a baseball theme song kind of thing. I know that turned me off at the time on it. Maybe that turned other people off. But all in all, I gotta say, I love this album. Every time I put it on, I play the entire thing and I really enjoy it. So that's the one I'm going with, at least for AC/DC. But you guys know I love Fly on the Wall. Okay, let's move on. All right, I'm doing these alphabetical if you haven't figured out. Okay, Britney Fox, Bite Down Hard from 1991, glam metal icons in my opinion. First without the original vocalist, Dizzy Dean Davidson. So right there, I understand why people dismiss this album. First to feature Tommy Paris, of which I've done an interview with. So you should check that out. It was a really killer interview to talk, especially about the writing of this album, how it all came to be, and how he joined the band and that kind of stuff. I loved the album long before that, which is why I reached out to him to do it. But for me, this album, where all the songs are co-written by the new guy, Tommy Paris at the time, I think did a stellar job filling the boots of Dizzy Dean Davidson. Now, some of that swagger and soulful, bluesy, hard rock that was Dizzy Davidson's, style that he brought to the band and everything, and having that out, I understand that. These were more straight ahead, hard rock songs. But I thought it was a great turn, especially for 1991. It was where the band needed to be. All in all, man, again, I know this one doesn't rank high. People always talk about the debut because of Girls' School. The second album, Boys in Heat, had Dream On it. This one here, nothing really stood out to anyone, and it kind of disappeared. But I love this album, and until the day I die, I think I will always pick bite down hard over any of the other two. And I had the other two first, so it's not a matter of this was the first one I got or anything like that. It was just, I don't know, man, it clicked with me. It was the right thing at the right time, and every single song on that album, I think, is a great one. All right, we're moving on to a Southern rock band that you all are going to know very well. You might not know this album, though. Blackfoot Medicine Man from 1990, their ninth studio album, had an entirely different lineup on here. And again, I think it's a lot of those things. It's member changes and stuff like that. But it's also on an entirely new record label. They had been on Atlantic and Atco and stuff like that. This is on Nally Records, Al Nally. I want to say he was might have been their manager at one point, I can't recall, but definitely their producer who had worked with them, starts his own record label. And I just don't think it had the right kind of distribution and everything it needed to get out there. But the band Blackfoot, Ricky Medlock had made a lot of missteps through the 80s, and nothing really had that Southern rock sound anymore. He was going for more of a hard rock sound. This is pretty much that, but I gotta say, when I didn't know that Blackfoot was a Southern rock band and had any of that sort of stuff behind them, and then they make this album here and it drops, and I'm listening to the radio, so I'm just hearing songs like Doing My Job, and the ballad on here, Soldier Blue, is amazing. Guitar Slinger Song and Dance. It was killer stuff. I thought they were a new band. I thought they were just a local Florida band kind of a thing. Turns out they had all that great history behind them, and I learned that after getting the album. But for me, this one here just moved me. Jumped off the radio, and the songs to this day, I think, still do that for me. All right, going to move into the heavy metal category here with Dio, Angry Machines from 1996, seventh studio album, second album to feature guitarist Tracy G. There he was right there. Last album to feature Vinny Appice, you pick. This album, though, I think just being on the small independent label Mayhem, which later got bought by Spitfire, and I forget the other labels that bought that label up and have reissued that stuff time and time again. Armory, one of those ones that bought and reissued recently. But this album here, after the slow dirgy, I understand it was going Black Sabbath driven. I think it was 1993, Something Highways. That album in particular, Strange Highways, if I'm not mistaken, just did not do it for me at all. Then they come back with this one here, and I was like, this sounds like classic Dio. I understand it was modernized for the 90s and that sort of stuff, and there's a lot of albums that I dislike from the 90s. In fact, that may be a whole other video that I'll be doing at some point. But I actually really liked this one here. And I just thought there was some very classic sounding stuff on it. The opening track, Institutional Man, had that very classic Sabbath sound. And Don't Tell the Kids was very Dio-esque. Hunter of the Heart, just full on classic Dio sounding. Double Monday was a really interesting one on here. Lots and lots of great stuff. If you've never checked this album out, I think it's a hidden gem amongst Dio albums. Okay, this one here, unpopular in the sense that most people go for the first two albums by this band, but I know those that are fans of this band love this one the same way a lot of you guys love Fly on the Wall by AC/DC. We got glam metal band Enough's Enough, third studio album, Animals with Human Intelligence from 1993, signed to Arista Records by Clive Davis, the owner, the music mogul guy that he is. So it's got to tell you a lot about how he felt about this band. In fact, this band has always had key people behind them. Howard Stern has been a huge fan and pushed this band for years. They were just so good, but for whatever reason, kind of ran under the radar. And this album here comes out in 1993, kind of does nothing because it's 1993, and I get it. But there are a lot of us that feel that this is the pinnacle of Enough's Enough. This is a fantastic album that doesn't get enough love. Most people tend to go to the debut, they go to Strength, and I love those albums too. Strength might be my sort of favorite in there, but I've always loved this album and just thought it was really, really worthy of the band and people checking it out and digging it. Whenever anyone's kind of looking for that obscure thing and hasn't gone that deep into the band, I'll always recommend it. Now, of course, Enough's Enough have tons of albums, so I can continue to recommend stuff in there on them. I absolutely love that they've got so much great stuff out there to dig into. And all of it's unpopular, really. Okay, moving on to an AOR melodic rock band, one of the big ones out there, Foreigner. Can't Slow Down from 2009. Entirely new lineup of the band with only Mick Jones, the guitarist, founding member, remaining in here. You got a new vocalist in here too. So Kelly Hansen coming in, does a fantastic job. Musical leader Jeff Pilson of Dokken is here. So you got some cool people, but it kind of became guns for hire sort of a thing. They just got a bunch of cool named guys that had been in the glam metal scene and the 80s rock scene and stuff like that for this album, and I don't think it was ultimately taken seriously. But if you stop and listen to the music on here, the opening track is as good of rocker as anything they did in the 80s. Songs like Say You Will, stuff like that. This song on here, title track, Can't Slow Down, I think is right in line with that kind of stuff. But the ballads on here, the melodic rockers that are on here, In Pieces, When It Comes to Love, Living in a Dream, and I Can't Give Up. Those first 5 songs on here are so good. This album is one of those ones where every single song on this album, I think, was absolutely stellar. It was just the fact that it was 2009. Streaming was already happening at this point, and it was an entirely new lineup, and people said, well, you know, if Lou Gramm isn't there, I'm not interested, not giving it a chance. And it's so unfortunate. And unfortunately, I think that's why we have never had an album after this. This is their last album. Even though the band is still together, I don't think we are ever going to see another full-length studio album of new material. And so we've got that one. But that one is my favorite of their unpopular albums. Even more so when they had Johnny Edwards come in on Unusual Heat, which was so good. I think I got to go this one in the end of the day because I think this one blows that one away. All right, got another glam metal band here, and I know a lot of you guys will fight me on whether or not they're actually a glam metal band, and I don't care. That's the era they came up in. That's what they were designated as. So, Great White, Let It Rock. And I know a bunch of you guys are going, oh, right? No, I don't care. 1996, their 8th studio album. The band made a conscious effort on this one to return to their hard rock roots after the very mellow acoustic Sail Away. Had like one good song on there, and I love the band, man. I tried that album so hard, and it just didn't do it for me. When they came back with this was like a breath of fresh air. Interesting, their longtime co-writer, and I think he was also a producer, but he was their manager, Alan Nevin, was not part of this one, and yet the band really excelled on here. And I didn't even know that at the time, so that had nothing to do with it. This is just one of those ones where it got a little bit more heavier sounding, but not so much that it was outside of their wheelhouse. So a lot of great stuff on here, in my opinion. Opening track, My World, kills it. Just like Big Goodbye and Psycho City and stuff like that off of some of their later day albums. It was good, but was heavy rockers. But then they've got stuff on here like Hand on the Trigger, which was amazing. Ain't No Way to Treat a Lady. Fantastic cover song on there. I want to say from the Angels, can't recall entirely, but I mean, they always did great cover songs on there. Okay, moving on to another Southern rock legend, right? Leonard Skinner. Okay, 1991 though, right? A lot of people are like, wait, what are you talking about? This is not a good album. I disagree completely. I think this one here is an absolutely stellar album. I love this thing. So, first album without Ronnie Van Zant, all right, I understand that completely. But we have younger brother, Johnny Van Zant coming in. They had already done the tribute tour, put out a live album from that. They put out a bunch of rarity stuff featuring Ronnie. So they kind of cleaned the vaults out. They had that, making the first album. And man, this one here, I just think fired on all cylinders. I still pull this thing out and think it rocks from top to bottom. Maybe a lot of you guys did at the time too, but it seems like nobody talks about this. And now when we see rankings on it, this is always so low in there. But that one there, for me was such a great album. And I will admit, this was my first Leonard Skinner album. I knew who the band was and the Roots and Freebird and all that sort of stuff. And then when they made this, I jumped on it because it was like, oh man, new Leonard Skinner, right? And I didn't know the legacy and all of that in the way that those that grew up with it. So I'm going to latch onto it more than maybe most people. But as far as an unpopular album, that one there, I think, takes the cake. All right, we're going to move into some theatrical rock, Broadway sounding stuff. I'm not even sure what to call the stuff that he does. But this guy, musical icon, Meatloaf, and his 1984 album, Bad Attitude. This thing here, I think, is absolutely stellar, and can't believe it didn't just explode in the 80s. I don't even know what it did at the time because I found it much later on. It's been out of print so many different times. I think it is actually back in print currently, so if you want to check this out, this would be one that I would tell you is top notch. So, done without Jim Steinman, and that's why most people dismiss this. There were 2 songs from him on here, but they were previously recorded by other artists and stuff, and I think they were actually written for Meat, but then they didn't make that album, right? So it ends up getting recorded by other people. But this one here, the bulk of the songs are written by a husband and wife team, Sarah Durkee and Paul Jacobs. And I don't really know who they are, except that they were more known for their TV series theme songs than actually anything like this. Yet, you know how TV theme songs have to be catchy, pull you in a minute and a half or whatever the time frame is for those opening credits. I think they did a stellar job. So give this a listen and see if you don't just think this is a perfect unpopular album. It's just one of those hidden gems, right? A lot of these are just the hidden gem albums in collections. But as I said, most of these are just extremely unpopular for some reason. This next one here, Motley Crue, New Tattoo from 2000, their 8th studio album, produced by Mike Klink, who had produced Appetite for Destruction, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. I think he was the perfect guy to bring in for a gritty, hard rock album from the glam metal legends Motley Crue. But Tommy Lee was not part of it, and that was big news at that time. So again, down to 3 members. We have Vince back, but Tommy Lee was out. And while most cases I would say a drummer doesn't matter, in this case it was kind of a strange thing because even he had such notoriety within the band, especially with marrying Pamela Anderson, going to jail, all the bad stuff that he did. Having Randy Castillo come in from Ozzy Osbourne's band certainly made up for it. But it was just kind of one of those things that I also want to say after the horrendous Generation Swine album, the comeback album, I think that was 97, a lot of people just weren't really willing to give them a continued try. And this one here should have been the big comeback album. And unfortunately, minus Tommy Lee being on a new record label, they weren't on Elektra anymore. They were on a small little label doing it themselves on Motley Records by that point. And I just think fans weren't willing to give it a shot. I will say this, it's not quite as well produced as, say, Dr. Feelgood or the 80s era stuff, and it leans a little bit more towards the punk sort of sound, punk rock. I mean, just more rock, more hard rock, but it's got that sort of punk flavor to it that they would do on some of the tracks. If you can kind of imagine a bunch of Anarchy in the UK style sounding stuff. There is some cool throwback stuff, but it didn't quite give you that hard rock Motley sound, and so I think a lot of people just tuned out to it. But I go back to this one time and time again as sort of an unsung hero within their catalog and love that a lot. Now, this next one's probably going to surprise the hell out of a lot of people. And I'm getting ready to contribute to a book on this band. And I'm going to be writing about this album here, talking about AOR melodic band Night Ranger and the album feeding off the mojo from 1999. So only featuring 3 guys in the band, down to a trio at this point. There were 5 guys at one time. We still got Brad Gillis in there, so certainly setting the tone for this album. And Kelly Keagy, the drummer, but also lead vocalist on a number of their hit songs. So he's still there, but they bring in Gary Moon on bass and vocals as the primary lead vocalist, taking over for Jack Blades. And most people just at that point are not into this, not going to give this a try, unfortunately. And for whatever reason, because they didn't have any hits off this thing, this album for me just does it. And I didn't even know about it at the time. I didn't get into Night Ranger until the reunion album of Neverland, I think was the name of the album. And that album didn't do anything for me. I bought it because of all the star people that were in the band itself that I knew from other bands. But when I went back and picked this one up, I was like, this is cool, man. This is awesome. I love this album. So, as I said, I'm going to be contributing to a book that is all about Night Ranger albums and talking about them and stuff. And I don't know when that will happen and everything, and I don't want to give out any more info on it, who's doing it and that sort of stuff. But you will be able to hear about this in great detail. I'll talk about that book. I'll probably review that book when it happens at the time. So just keep an ear out for that. All right, we're going to wrap things up here with another glam metal icon band, Skid Row in Thick Skin from 2003. It was their fourth studio album, and it was the first one without Sebastian Bach, their original frontman. Yes, I know they had guys before that, but they never recorded with him, so I'm always going to say Sebastian Bach was the original frontman of Skid Row. This has Johnny Solinger coming in, brand new lead vocalist. They appeared on an independent label, World Sound, so the distribution on this, I'm sure, was horrible. So not a major label. It was also 2003. Streaming was already happening at this point. So I'm sure all those things played into it. It's also not the sound of Skid Row. So it doesn't sound heavy. It's not Slave to the Grind. It's got a couple rockers on there. The opening track on here, New Generation, was kind of cool, but I don't know. It kind of sounded forced to me, and especially the lyrical aspect of it. But I thought everything else on here was so well written, even though it was outside of the style of Skid Row. The album itself, so well written beyond that opening track. I've learned to love that song. But I think the album is sort of an unsung hidden gem in there. There's so much great stuff on the album. It's just great songs, more of an AOR melodic rock sounding style stuff, but just a great new direction. Now, if they had mixed up some of the debut, some of Slave to the Grind on it a little bit more, I think we'd be talking about this album in greater detail. It's also just not quite produced up to par, in my opinion, but I love it. I go back to this album a lot. When it came out, it hit me right. I devoured it. It was a killer album. And so there you go. 12 of my favorite unpopular albums that most people don't like, but I still pull out on a regular basis. And I'm going to preference this whole thing with the fact that a lot of this has to do with it. I get burnt out on the same stuff over and over and over. And so when there is that album that almost nothing is ever played on the radio, maybe the band doesn't play any of this stuff live, I'll tend to gravitate towards something like that simply because the only time I'm ever hearing it is if I put it on. And oftentimes that's what a lot of these are that are here. These are albums, including this one here. But these guys hear so much of that sort of stuff. So there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what favorite album you love that you think is an unpopular album or you always hear people ragging on. You know, let's find out. Let's see what albums they are, because I think a lot of these albums aren't as unpopular as a lot of people think they are. All right, everyone. Take care. Have a good one. And I'll see you real soon. Bye, guys.